So we actually have no idea what they were tested on. We were told that they were tested on for medical reasons, not for consumer products, but we don't know specifically what was done to them, what was tested on them, et cetera. So their names again are Frederick and Douglass, and they're named after Frederick Douglass, who basically is a slave who escaped slavery and then spent the rest of his life fighting to end slavery. So we sort of named them in honor of him because these guys are, we would say they're like ambassadors to animal testing. Every time that we're walking them, every time people meet them, we give an opportunity to like educate the public about animal testing. You probably flip to the next slide. Oh, okay, well, that's Freddie's ear right there. And you can go to the next one. So what is animal testing? So animal testing is basically when they use, or like the term vivisection basically means that they are testing on living animals as opposed to dissection, which lots of schools do, where they test on animals who are already dead or like specific organs from an animal. Vivisection is basically testing on living animals like these guys right here. The public in general believes that animal testing stopped like 10 or 15 years ago. There's a really good reason for that. The industries, don't publicize that they test on animals. Whenever there are actual polls done, people generally do not support animal testing. Probably flip to the next one. So there's basically like two different types of animal testing that's being done. One is for medical, and I'm making air signs because we'll get to why I do that, versus non-medical. So medical testing is for drugs, for surgical procedures, I'm trying to find it on my little thing here. I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry, and also like implants, like heart implants, valves, and things like that. Non-medical testing are things like consumer products like shampoos, cosmetics, personal care, household cleansers, etc. So pharmaceutical drugs, the development of which it's mandatory by federal law that they be tested on animals. Non-medical things like shampoos, cosmetics, etc. Is not mandatory at all. So it's not a government regulation that has to be done. The corporations are choosing to do that. These companies will, if you ask them, they will always say, well, we're doing that for your safety. We're going to spray hairspray into beagles' eyes or rabbits' eyes because we'll know how dangerous these things are, and then it's safer for you. But the actual truth is they're doing it to protect themselves. They do testing on animals because their insurance companies basically make it mandatory so that if they are ever sued by a consumer, they can basically say, well, these were tested on animals and they were shown to be safe on animals. So it's kind of part of a bigger propaganda issue that these large corporations are trying to make it seem as if they're doing this to help you. One question that's always asked is, why are they testing on animals? And the biggest answer is money. So the National Institute of Health, which is a government, part of the government, please flip to the next one, which is part of the government, basically gives $14.5 billion with a B to mostly universities and public institutions all over the country. So that is a lot of money. We're talking about at least 15 different universities are getting about $100 million a year from the federal government to test on beagles and rats and cats, etc. So we're talking about like massive amounts of money. So on top of that, you also have companies who are providing food to all these labs, so they're profiting. The companies who build the cages, security, breeders, for instance, which we didn't know until we really started getting into this, that there are actual breeders who are breeding beagles, for instance, to directly go to labs. So they are profiting directly to basically breed these guys to go to labs to then be tortured and at the end of the experiment being killed. So there's tons of money. So whenever the other side whether it's the medical doctors or the large corporations like Procter & Gamble who test on animals, tell you that this is for your benefit or that this is to like save everybody's lives, you always have to think about how much money is involved in these industries. So it's a lot. Just as a quick thing right here, which is up here, that's Frederick. So people always ask, like, why beagles? You know, of all the dogs, why beagles? So it's estimated that about 96% of all the dogs who are being tested in labs are actually beagles. In 2011, I believe, was that number. So in 2011, they believe that 80,000 dogs were used across the US for testing in 2011. Mostly for toxicity testing, but also for cosmetics and other products. The reason that beagles are the breed of choice is for all the reason that beagles make amazing pets. They're forgiving, so they can do terrible things to them, but the next time the experimenter goes over to the cage, the beagle gets really excited because the beagle wants love and wants affection. They're really docile, they're generally pretty mellow. Sadly, beagles adopt to a life in a cage better than other dogs. I don't know how familiar you guys are with beagles, but these guys are technically European beagles. So they're a bit taller and larger and weigh a bit more than the beagles in the US. So the beagles in the US are generally about 18, 23, 24 pounds, somewhere in that range. So that's also part of it too, is that they're easy to basically like grab and do these things to than larger dogs. Yeah.
I would just like to clarify that the industry says they adapt well to living in a cage.
Okay, yeah.
That is not necessarily something that I would stand by, and I would say that it would be very difficult for any dog to adapt to living their entire life inside a cage. So
yeah.
But just to clarify, we don't necessarily believe that they do well in cages, but the industry says that.
Which is a really good point, because beagles by nature are hunting dogs. That's why they were originally bred. So beagles love to run. They love to go particularly after rabbits and squirrels. That's their thing. But they're also, because they're hunters, they're also smell driven. So beagles love to catch a smell and go run. And so, yes, and they love food. So having a beagle who doesn't have an opportunity to run, who is being fed like the worst food you could possibly imagine, which we'll get to the company who provides them food under the, like what you guys can do. But you know, the food that they're basically given is like of the lowest quality you could possibly imagine, because it's intended to make it so that they don't basically go to the bathroom in their cage. So they're very low in fiber and other nutritious properties that, you know, that other animals usually get. So it's called, so LD50 stands for lethal dose 50. And what that is they will continue to give a toxin to the animal until half of them basically die. So in those types of experiments, half of these animals, dogs, rabbits, etc., are being killed within that experiment. And the idea that they claim is that when half of them die, that's the perfect level of toxicity that could potentially harm a human. And so that's how much they'll allow in a particular product or medication. You know, so again, in that case, they're clearly killing the animal. So even at the end of the experiment, because of two things, one is it's so cheap for them to just go to a breeder and get more dogs, cats, and other animals, they will kill them. As well, they just don't want the public to know that they're doing this, and particularly when it comes to rabbits, cats, and dogs, because these are the animals we love, these are the animals that we grow up with. And then they know that the public would be outraged if they knew that these beautiful dogs were basically being tested on something like shampoo or perfume or, you know, what you clean your toilet bowl with. They know that the public won't like that. So you have the scientific issues of are these tests actually working? Particularly, when, you know, so we're talking about medical testing now. Do these tests on animals actually work? Are they saving lives, as the industry tries to tell you? Are they making humans' lives better, et cetera? And then we have the flip side, which we'll talk about next, which is more about the ethical issue. Since animals are sentient beings, meaning that they feel pain, they suffer, they have an emotional life, as anybody here who's ever lived with a dog or a cat or rabbit knows, that your animals feel fear, they feel pain, you take them to the vet and they have to get a shot, they react to that. So the question ethically is it okay to take an animal who suffers, who's going to be tortured and live in like terrible conditions, even if scientifically it does work, is that something that we should be supporting because of the effect it has basically on a fellow sentient being? So in terms of the scientific issue, for the way the process works is that a drug has to basically be tested by law, by federal law, on animals. Once it goes through the animal phase and it is deemed to be safe, it then moves on to human clinical trials. So an amazing statistic is that 92 out of 100 drugs that are deemed safe after going through animal testing fail in human clinical trials. So that means we have a 92% fail rate. So if you just think about that for a second, that basically means that only 8% of the time when drugs are going through animal trials does it show that it to be effective for humans, just in that first human phase. So immediately you should think, this is clearly not working. Why it's also important is there are plenty of drugs that failed through the animal testing thing that later on turned out to be highly effective for humans. So cancer drugs, et cetera, that took many, many years of being delayed because they failed in animal testing. So that is something to wrap your mind around too, that people are still sick and possibly dying because drugs are being tested inappropriately on animals, they're failing, and then it takes years before they get to humans to actually try. And as this says, many, many doctors and scientists are now saying, like, this is actually starting to change. Now, it's not changing in terms of the $14.5 billion and the 100 million animals who are being killed. But at this stage right now, there are plenty of doctors and scientists who are basically saying that biologically, animals and humans are so different that this is just crazy. It's almost like we are basically doing the same experiments that we did 30 and 40 years ago, when we have all this brand new technology and the world is such a different place that they're still doing these outdated ways of testing. Yeah. Just so you have an idea of some of the things that are happening in these labs to these types of animals is they're having chemicals and toxins injected into their bloodstream, as we said, to a certain degree to find out how much it takes to kill them. They are having, rabbits, it's called the Dre's test, where they basically will spray chemical, like they will, through devices, hold the bunny rabbit's eyes open and will spray horrible chemicals into their eyes to find out what that effect is on that specific chemical. So these are horrible things that are happening to these animals. They have, I'm sorry I'm blanking on the name of it, that device that I don't know if you've ever seen it, but they have a metal device that is basically drilled into cats. There's lots of pictures if you look for them, cats and also monkeys' brains, which clearly that's just like horribly painful, and these like sit in their heads forever. Lots of experiments with cats where they purposely blind them. Other experiments with chimpanzees and other non-human primates where they basically will take away their babies to find out like how the mother reacts to not having a child.
Ben, this is something that was on a previous slide but wasn't really covered. That the issue as well is that some of the testing that falls into the category of medical or scientific is really just about satisfying some scientists' curiosity about something. I mean, there's no social value or redeeming value that you could even justify some of the things, like the maternal studies where they, impregnate a chimpanzee and then let her give birth to the baby chimpanzee and then take it away so they can study, how she grieves over her missing baby. It's like, what are we learning from that? We're learning that mothers and children have a bond, like mothers and children like each other. There's no redeeming value to some of these things that they're doing, but they're just making tons and tons of money.
Yeah, so they keep doing it, obviously. And in one instance, we were able to rescue some puppies from a lab, and these puppies were 5 and 6 weeks old, and they had already had chemicals tested on them. So think about how horribly sad that is. Now, the good thing with these puppies is the ones who survived, didn't spend 5 years in a lab, they spent a few weeks, so they seem to be pretty normal, at least in terms of socialization, whereas these guys who are doing great right now, but I mean, you could tell at the beginning, like they're pretty intensely fearful animals, as you can imagine. Also, too, within the labs, there are plenty of times where labs have gotten in trouble for neglect, for not feeding animals, for not giving them water, for basically purposely harming them for non-medical reasons, like getting frustrated and punching dogs, which there are really sad and pathetic videos all over the internet of stuff like that. They get absolutely, for the most part, absolutely no veterinary care. If they're getting any veterinary care, it's because they still need that animal and the animal's not doing well, and they just make sure that the animal is like well enough to continue. But as an example of the 40 beagles that we got, these guys got really lucky. Like they had never had any medical care, so their teeth were horrible. Their teeth were like basically rotting. And one of the dogs who was at our house, who was adopted after somebody we're now friendly with, he had 8 teeth extracted out of his mouth. These guys did okay, but you know, they're obviously like their liver, their kidney, they have all sorts of issues based on the fact of not getting any sort of medical care at all. And some of these universities have been cited for that. Yeah, okay, so clearly it's really important to tell all of your family and friends, particularly about cruelty-free products, because this is the kind of thing that as you educate more and more people, as more and more people start supporting these companies who aren't testing on animals and taking money away from the ones who are, and hopefully they get excited about it and they will send them letters, that's how we make a difference. If you go back to the beginning, 80% of this animal testing is being done for non-medical reasons, meaning there's no federal mandate to do it. So this is something that, like, if you guys, through whatever way you can, through friends, family, through social media, the more you educate people, the more that we get people to basically not support products that are being tested on animals, it will eventually stop. And let's pretend that we get it from 80% to 70% in 5 or 10 years. That could possibly mean the lives of 6 million animals. Like, there's nothing else we can do that's like as powerful in terms of this. Like, honestly, I think animal testing, of all the horrible things that happen to animals and all these different categories of how animals are used and abused, this is one that's doable, because again, 80% of this is happening for products that we can actually make a difference. Like trying to get, which goes back to like writing letters to Congress, it's important. You send them an email and you basically say, hey, I want you to stop animal testing. I think it's unethical. I don't think it's right, whatever that is. Very small chance that we'll do anything, but again, the more people they hear from, the better. But when we're talking about, again, cruelty-free, non-medical products, like that's our game. We can make a difference. If enough people become educated, enough people like stop giving money to animal charities, stop buying these cruelty products, we make a big difference. Yeah, let me just finish real fast. Big one, Purina. So Purina, by the way, Purina is the one who is basically giving, for the most part, I don't know what the numbers are, let's say 95% of all the food that's going to university labs and private labs all over this country, Purina.
Doesn't that mean that Purina is a bad dog food to have?
Well, yes. They have different formulas. The formula, so not only are they giving, it's called lab chow for dogs and cats, but they're making pellets for rabbits, they're making food for monkeys and chimpanzees. And it's even worse than the terrible products they already make that's on them, you know, that you can buy for your own dog and cat. It's even worse because, again, it has very few nutrients in it to basically minimize waste, because they don't want the dogs and the rabbits, et cetera, to go to the bathroom in their cages. They want them to do it less. And go on their website, because Purina owns some other companies too. But if you are buying Purina, or to let people know, do not buy Purina, because they are probably making $150 million just supplying.
Anybody can go on their website, it's labdiet.com.
Lab Diet.
And they have, on the side of the page, they have information on all of the foods that they make for all the different animals. So they have rodent diet, and they have primate diet, and they have, I mean, and if you actually read this stuff, and they're so proud of the products that they make for laboratories and how well they help keep the animals under control and minimize waste.
Yeah, and there's nothing on there about how like they're taking care of the animals, how the animals are eating good food. It's all about minimizing waste. I mean, it just shows you like how terrible this food is. So do not buy Purina. Tell people you know, do not support Purina, because they are making millions and millions of dollars off of supporting this industry. Big one, I guess there's only 2 states where it's actually legal, Ohio and Oklahoma. There are people called, is it Plan B?
Class B, but
Class
the
B.
issue with the shelter issue is different.
Oh, okay.
Well, the keeping pets indoors, yes.
So there are some creepy people who are basically stealing people's pets and selling them to labs. So I think there's more protection now in that way, but it still happens. So it's a really good idea if you have cats to keep them indoors and to make sure that your dogs don't get out because there are some really scary, creepy people who sell dogs and cats to labs. And then lastly, if you're going to get a dog or cat, please adopt. There are 4 to 5 million dogs and cats who are killed every year in the shelter system in the US while people are going to breeders and buying animals. You can find purebreds, you can find beagles. There are specific, not just in shelters, but specific rescue groups who have purebreds. So any dog you want, you can adopt.
And
Go.
then